Hey guys, tonight we are going to uncover a page of history full of upheaval and surprise, where a girl who was nearly cast aside became the greatest queen in history. I'm sure that every time the name Queen Elizabeth is mentioned, the first image that pops into your head is that smiling, crown-wearing old lady of the 21st century who never abdicates. That is Elizabeth II, who reigned for 70 years, a stable and lasting legacy. But tonight, we need a little drama before bed. We are going to talk about Elizabeth I. If Elizabeth II is a traditional pizza, familiar and always around, then Elizabeth I is the secret taco, full of surprises, a bit spicy, and incredibly unforgettable. She was a woman whose life was like a thrilling drama series. Born into royalty, declared illegitimate, nearly beheaded by her own older sister, who earned the terrifying nickname Bloody Mary, and then, boom, she took the throne. She overcame everything, from the dungeon to the throne, and when someone dared to threaten England with a colossal fleet, she didn't even flinch. Elizabeth I didn't just rule, she ruled like a badass. She used her single status to manipulate international politics, making European princes line up to propose only to be politely friend-zoned by her. She was the true boss of the 16th century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Well, I am relaxing here in the Los Angeles, California area. Share with me, where are you relaxing and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Many people today are familiar only with Queen Elizabeth II, but few realize that Elizabeth I was truly the emblem of England's strength and wisdom, even though she was never expected to ascend the throne. Born into the scandal-plagued Tudor family, where her father married 6 times, and those around her often met tragic ends, Elizabeth I nonetheless maintained remarkable confidence and determination. From an early age, she memorized the histories of ancient Rome, studied politics and religion with fervent interest, and prepared herself for the moment that would define her destiny. By the time Elizabeth reached the age of 25, England faced one of its greatest challenges since the Norman conquest of 1166. In the year 1588, the Spanish Armada, 130 ships, touted as the most formidable fleet of its era, sailed directly into English waters with invasion in mind. At that moment, religious conviction ran deep. Spain was fervently Catholic, while England had embraced Protestantism. All of Europe watched breathlessly, for the outcome would determine not only England's fate, but the future of religion across the continent. While many expected Elizabeth to hide behind fortress walls and command her armies from afar, she made a startlingly different decision. She would appear in person to her troops at Tilbury. On a misty morning, Elizabeth I emerged before the assembled soldiers in pale pink military attire, unarmed, her expression calm yet commanding. The soldiers and sailors could scarcely believe their eyes rather than a secluded princess. They saw their queen stride forward as though taking a leisurely walk through the royal gardens. Her first steps onto the battlefield dispelled every doubt. In the tense hush, Elizabeth spoke not loudly, but clearly. "I am come amongst you, as you see, at this time, not for my recreation and disport, but being resolved, in the midst and heat of the battle, to live and die amongst you all, to lay down for my God, for my kingdom, and for my people, my honour and my blood, even in the dust. Know that I have but the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." These few short sentences contained all her courage and resolve. She was not merely a symbolic figure, but the very heartbeat of the more than 10,000 soldiers gazing upon her. That moment galvanized the English forces. The smaller, more agile English vessels fired the first volleys of cannon fire, then slipped into the fog. Over the following days, storms and nimble tactics threw the Spaniards into disarray. The enormous armada was scattered by wind, weather, and strategy, and gradually was forced to retreat without a trace. The victory at Tilbury was not only a blow to the ambitions of Philip II, but also the beginning of Elizabeth I's golden age of boldness. This dramatic achievement not only saved the nation's destiny, but also etched the image of a gentle yet formidable queen, one unafraid to risk her life to protect her people into the national consciousness. The echo of her speech spread across every corner of England. From bustling taverns to remote coastal villages, stories of the courageous queen were passed from lip to ear, stirring pride in all who heard them. And that was only the beginning of Elizabeth I's magnificent journey. Her later path would be filled with challenges. 2 months imprisoned in the Tower of London, a battle of wits with Mary I, and the building of a prosperous England in military, culture, and law. But trust me, those details will make you even more captivated and thrilled than ever before. Now, close your eyes and relax your shoulders, and let the courage and wisdom of Elizabeth I guide you into the enthralling chapters yet to come. Before she became a legend for her victory against the Armada, Elizabeth, then only 21 years old, endured 2 harrowing months in the Tower of London. In March of 1554, after a failed uprising against Mary I, Elizabeth was imprisoned as a perceived threat to the Protestant cause. This was no ordinary jail. It was the same place where her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been held before her execution 2 years earlier. Each day, Elizabeth awoke in darkness, the chapel bells tolling through the bars, and she pictured her mother ascending the scaffold in that freezing, unfeeling chamber. Imagine that young woman on the threshold of her 20s, clad in a simple gown, stepping through the heavy gates of the tower. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat across the stone floor, tightening hearts with dread. Her cell measured only enough for a rough bed, a rickety wooden table, and a tiny window. Light filtered in sparingly, revealing Elizabeth's pale face, once bright with smiles, now shaded by sorrow. Her fear sprang not only from her uncertain fate at the hands of the court, but also from the tragic memory of her mother. Anne Boleyn kneeling in powdered hair, hands trembling on the day of her condemnation. Then, like a whisper of wind, the 19th of May 1554 arrived. On her mother's death anniversary, the tower's iron door swung open quietly, and Elizabeth was moved to house arrest. She stepped out with trembling shoulders, yet her eyes gleamed with new hope. In that instant, life itself felt renewed. Rather than collapse under despair, Elizabeth nurtured an unbreakable resolve. She understood that this ordeal would hone her will, transforming a fragile girl into a steely leader. Time passed swiftly. In 1558, Mary I succumbed to illness. Not long afterward, Edward VI, her half-brother, died at the age of 15. Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day queen, occupied the throne for a mere 9 days before being convicted of treason. One by one, every rightful heir passed from the stage, as if destiny were clearing the path. And Elizabeth, after months of solitary confinement, stood apart from courtly intrigue, waiting for her moment to arrive. At last, on the 17th of November, 1558, Elizabeth crossed history's threshold and proclaimed herself queen at the age of 25. London's overcast sky seemed to part, allowing a beam of winter sunlight to strike her silver crown. The bitter chill no longer made onlookers shiver. Instead, it accentuated her steely determination. In that moment, Elizabeth not only ascended the throne, but also entered the hearts of millions, from humble cottages in the countryside to opulent royal palaces. No longer the imprisoned princess, she had become a symbol of hope, a sovereign who would prevent religion from swinging violently between Catholicism and Protestantism, who would bring peace to a kingdom long plagued by upheaval. The people of England cheered, recounting the night Elizabeth awoke in the Tower, and the next morning emerged radiant living proof of the power of faith and an iron will. Immediately upon ascending the throne, Elizabeth I proved she was no fly-by-night monarch, but rather a ruler with far-sighted vision. She swiftly enacted the Act of Uniformity and the Religious Settlement, 2 statutes crafted as a life-preserver for the realm after years of religious turmoil. Although Elizabeth herself was a Protestant, she permitted Catholics to worship freely in private homes, so long as they acknowledged her as their one and only queen. A masterstroke that killed 2 birds with 1 stone, secure her crown and soothe the nation's tensions. How brilliant is that? In that instant, the people of England breathed a collective sigh of relief. From the busiest taverns to the smallest village churches, word of the Queen's moderation spread everywhere. Instead of violent swings from one faith to another, they now found they could attend a Catholic Mass one Sunday and a Protestant service the next without fear of scorn. Peace, fragile though it was, became a reality that so many yearned for. But Elizabeth's reign did not stop at domestic tranquility. Under her patronage, English art exploded like fireworks on New Year's Eve. Tragic plays of heartbreak, socially satirical poetic dramas, and poetry rich in language emerged and left audiences spellbound. Shakespeare fans rejoice. Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet enjoyed royal sponsorship and were performed right in the palace courtyard, earning thunderous applause from the nobility. Edmund Spenser was no less remarkable when he produced The Fairy Queen, an epic so fantastical it felt like living mythology, captivating both scholars and common folk alike. While poets and playwrights busily wove their verses, Elizabeth dispelled rumours that she was uneducated. She mastered 7 languages: English, Latin, French, Greek, Spanish, Italian, and Welsh. When she met with privy councillors or foreign ambassadors, speaking to them in their own tongue instantly won their admiration. What could be cooler than that? And don't imagine the Queen spent all her time in art galleries or museums. She was also a formidable archer and a true horsewoman. Each morning, Elizabeth exercised her horse in the palace courtyard, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cold stone stunning onlookers. Then in the afternoon, she took her bow and arrows to the hunt. Only the luckiest deer escaped the Queen's lightning-fast shot. This blend of profound learning, liberal cultural patronage, and martial skill created an image of Elizabeth that was both powerful and gentle, captivating the people of England. They felt pride in a queen who was not a rigid statue but a dynamic innovator, ushering in the resplendent Elizabethan era of literature and art. Venture onto any street corner and you'd hear someone exclaim, "Thanks to Elizabeth, England is now both mighty and refined." From the Globe Theatre's raucous applause to the tender love poems drifting through cosy tea rooms, her influence was everywhere, subtle yet profound. Elizabeth showed that a truly great monarch must not only wield a sword, but also master words, love the arts, and reconcile all differences. And so, amid the jubilation of court and commoner alike, England seemed to step out of its old, tumultuous age and into a new golden era, one in which knowledge and spirit were celebrated. Religious peace became the guiding principle, and culture and art reigned with boundless vitality. The breath of that golden age still lingers today in every page of history, every canvas, and every line of poetry, leaving future generations in awe. You might think that every queen must marry after all, dynasties hinge on heirs, right? Well, Elizabeth I decided to flip the script. Instead of seeking a prince to share her crown, she chose a path that left every European court both hopeful and frustrated. She remained single for life. Picture a grand game of diplomatic Tinder, where suitors from Sweden to Austria swiped right on Queen Elizabeth, 25, looking for alliance. Princes sent portraits, dukes shipped jewels, and every diplomat kept their fingers crossed that this time would be the one. But Elizabeth, ever the savvy strategist, left her suitors dangling in delightful uncertainty. Her most enduring relationship was with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, childhood friend, wartime confidant, and perhaps the most smitten man at court. He divorced not once but twice, each time hoping for Elizabeth's hand, only to be rebuffed by her coolly delivered line, "I shall have here but one mistress and no master." In other words, she'd rather be queen alone than wife to any man. Ouch, Dudley. Heartbroken, he nonetheless remained forever loyal until his natural death. That is, leaving Elizabeth to channel her romantic energies elsewhere. Enter Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, 33 years her junior. Imagine the court gossip. Shh! The Queen winked at Essex today. Under her favour, he rose swiftly knighted, pampered, practically prancing at her side. But youthful vanity and impatience can be a toxic brew. Essex, convinced of his indispensability, spearheaded a rebellion against the crown. The news of his treason reached Elizabeth as she sat playing the virginals, an intimate keyboard-like instrument with her fingers dancing lightly across the keys. One moment she plucked a gentle trill. The next, a messenger whispered the grim tidings. Her reaction? A single, almost imperceptible pause, and then she resumed playing as though nothing had happened. Talk about icy composure. Essex was tried, convicted, and beheaded, a tragic finale that underscored Elizabeth's unshakable resolve. By refusing marriage, she not only safeguarded her sovereignty, no foreign prince could claim authority by virtue of being her husband, but also wielded what we might today call soft power. The rumour that she might wed any one of a dozen European royals kept courts on tenterhooks. Envoys flitted to and fro with proposals. Each foreign power hoped to pull England into its sphere. Yet Elizabeth made no commitment, using the very possibility of marriage as a diplomatic lever. This carefully cultivated persona earned her the moniker the Virgin Queen, not because she flaunted celibacy for its own sake, but because it symbolized her autonomy. In a male-dominated world, she claimed ultimate authority over her body and her realm. No man would ever sit at her side to share her crown. And because she maintained the illusion of pending nuptials, Spain, France, and the Holy Roman Empire treated England with a polite deference born of hope and fear. Hope for alliance, fear of rejection. Through it all, Elizabeth played her cards with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. She dabbled in flirtations just enough to keep morale high and alliances sparkling, but she never laid down her queenly guard. When personal affection threatened to cloud her judgment, she reminded herself and her court that the welfare of England outweighed private passion. Her single status became her greatest diplomatic asset. By not marrying, she prevented any foreign power from gaining a foothold in English affairs, all while appearing amiable to every suitor. So what lesson does this romantic chess game teach us? Perhaps that true power sometimes lies in saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. By choosing solitude over subservience, Elizabeth preserved her agency and kept her enemies guessing. In a society that equated marriage with security, she redefined strength in independence. Picture this: England, a small island nation, suddenly craving the exotic spices of the East and the fat purses of plundered treasure. Enter Elizabeth I, fresh from quelling domestic strife, now casting her gaze across the horizon. Under her watch, England leapt into the age of exploration, planting the seeds of what would one day become a global empire. First up, meet Sir Francis Drake, sea rover turned privateer, under royal warrant. In the year 1572, Elizabeth quietly authorized Drake to raid Spanish ships in the Caribbean. Imagine her, in her private gallery, nodding sagely at reports of silver bars and chests of gold bullion arriving in Plymouth. To Spain, he was a pirate. To England, he was a patriotic entrepreneur, a mariner with a letter of marque rather than a noose around his neck. But Elizabeth wanted more than hit-and-run raids. In 1577, she entrusted Drake with a truly audacious mission: circumnavigate the globe. Over 3 years, 1577 to 1580, Drake and his loyal crew battled storms, dared Spanish galleons, and looted coastal settlements from Patagonia to the Spice Islands. When the Golden Hind limped home, she carried enough treasure to make any Victorian banker drool. Elizabeth quietly funneled the gains into the royal treasury, weakening Spain's grip on the seas and boosting England's coffers without firing a single royal broadside. While Drake was busy mapping the world's edges, Elizabeth scouted for colonial pioneers. She tapped Sir Walter Raleigh to establish the first English outpost in North America. Raleigh's ventures in Virginia, though famously ending in the lost colony, sparked a frenzy of interest. English merchants, eyeing profits from tobacco and timber, formed charters and joint stock companies. Elizabeth, ever the hands-off sponsor, granted them charters to trade, settle, and prosper. "Go forth," she seemed to whisper, "and bring me back wonders." All the while she nurtured a nimble navy. Forget the lumbering Spanish galleons. England's ships were built for speed and surprise. These lightning ships, as some called them, could fire a volley of cannon and vanish into the mist before the enemy realized what hit them. Shipwrights at Deptford and Woolwich hunched over new designs, while navigation schools in Greenwich trained young stars to read the heavens and chart unknown waters. Meanwhile, Elizabeth deployed another clever tactic: the diplomatic marriage wink. Rumours swirled of negotiations with Swedish princes and Austrian dukes, each court hoping to seal an alliance. But she never signed on the dotted line. This perpetual courtship kept Europe on its toes. France dared not offend her, and Spain could not dismiss her entirely. The mere possibility of matrimony became political leverage, ensuring that foreign powers courted England's favour even as her privateers harassed their ships. The results were staggering. England began reaping riches without holding vast colonies yet. Drake's loot funded more voyages. Raleigh's ventures inspired settlers to press further inland, and private companies quietly laid plans for trade in India and beyond. By the time Elizabeth's reign drew to a close, the stage was set for an empire. The East India Company, established in 1590, stood on the shoulders of her earlier policies, ready to steam into the Indian Ocean with tea, spices and silk. Imagine standing on the white cliffs of Dover, watching a line of English sails vanish into the sunrise. Each ship carried hopes of wealth and glory, backed by the quiet confidence of a queen who knew the value of daring and discretion. She never needed to conquer with armies on land. Her fleets of privateers, explorers and merchants did the job for her, sending back not only treasure but also maps, knowledge, and the promise of new worlds. That, my friends, is how Elizabeth I turned a restless island into a seafaring powerhouse. With privateers bold enough to plunder pirate style under royal colours, and visionaries brave enough to plant the first seeds of colonization, she laid the foundation for centuries of English and later British naval supremacy. So the next time you sip your Earl Grey or marvel at a globe spinning, tip your hat to Elizabeth, the queen who charted England's course to empire without ever leaving her palace. Alright, buckle up, because Elizabeth I's marriage game was nothing short of world-class diplomacy. Picture her court as the hottest social scene in Europe circa 1558. Every prince, duke and archduke lining up with bouquets and love letters, hoping to snag a royal marriage. But Elizabeth? She played it cool, never saying yes, but never quite saying no either. She started with Sweden, dangling the prospect of a union that might deliver Scandinavian support against Catholic Spain. Envoys crossed stormy seas bearing silks and silver, only to find themselves in a months-long holding pattern, Elizabeth's court politely considering each proposal. Next up, the Duchy of Austria, heirs of the Habsburgs, eyeing English gold to bolster their coffers. Again, she kept them guessing. A coy smile here, a vague promise there. But the final ink never dried. This dance of maybe one day served a double purpose. First, it flattered Europe's finest. Every ruler wanted the honour of marrying the English queen. Second, it granted Elizabeth priceless intelligence. While diplomats fawned over her portrait, her own spies sifted through their correspondence, learning which courts were about to rebel or call on her for aid. She wielded her marital ambiguity like a seasoned chess master, forcing rival powers into a state of polite paralysis. Amid all this, the man closest to her, her most devoted suitor, was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. They'd been thick as thieves since childhood, weathering Mary I's reign together. Dudley's devotion was so intense, he divorced twice, each time hoping Elizabeth would relent. But she shot down his dreams with one unforgettable line: "I shall have here but one mistress, and no master." Boom. Heartbreak in the palace, yet he remained her staunchest ally, soldiering at her side through wars and intrigues. When Dudley finally passed away of natural causes, Elizabeth was briefly bereft. But diplomacy waits for no one, so she shifted her attention to a younger flame, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, 33 years her junior. Court gossip went into overdrive. They met by moonlight in the Privy Garden. She laughed at his jokes until dawn. Essex, flushed with favour, rose through the ranks as if propelled by royal wings. But youth can be as rash as it is charming. Essex, convinced of his indispensability, plotted to wrest power from the Queen's trusted ministers. His rebellion, though half-baked, forced Elizabeth's hand. Word reached her while she sat at her virginals, an intimate, harp-like keyboard, her fingers dancing over keys in gentle counterpoint. A messenger slipped into the room. Whispers turned to shouts. She paused, barely lifting her gaze, then continued her melody as though nothing had happened. Epic. Essex's treason ended with a public trial and execution. Elizabeth's calm response sent shockwaves through every court. She would tolerate loyalty and affection, but never at the expense of her kingdom. By refusing to marry, she not only ensured that no foreign power could claim authority through a husband, but also demonstrated what we now call soft power. Her legendary status as the Virgin Queen became more than a personal choice. It was a diplomatic tool. Europe's greatest dynasties courted her with lavish gifts, each hoping to secure an alliance, and none succeeded. Spain's Philip II fumed. France's Catherine de' Medici seethed. and the Holy Roman Emperor paced his chambers. Yet all treated England with deference, hoping to catch Elizabeth in a moment of vulnerability. But she never wavered. The realm outlasted every suitor's hope. And what did this lonely monarch gain? Absolute sovereignty, unshared with any spouse, a reputation for iron-willed independence, and a potent diplomatic lever that kept her enemies uncertain and her allies attentive. She proved that saying no can be just as powerful as saying yes, especially when delivered with a dazzling smile and impeccable timing. So next time you contemplate a hard no in your own life, whether to a project, a promise, or a partnership, remember Elizabeth I. She built one of history's most glittering reigns not through marriage, but through masterful independence, turning endless proposals into a perpetual advantage. And in doing so, she reminded the world that true power often lies in the freedom to choose oneself. Imagine a Europe tangled in dynastic dramas, and marriage politics spouses swapped like playing cards, alliances forged then broken over dinner, while Elizabeth I quietly turned her gaze seaward. She understood that true power might lie not in tangled court intrigues, but in mastering the oceans. So she set about building a navy that would make her surviving suitors swoon and her enemies quiver. First, she embraced the concept of the privateer state, sanctioned pirates ripping Spanish treasure from under Philip II's nose. In 1572, Elizabeth slipped Sir Francis Drake a secret letter of marque, effectively telling him, "Go forth and plunder, good sir, but mind you plant the Queen's flag." Before long, Drake's cannons barked in the Caribbean, and he returned to Plymouth dripping with gold, silver, and exotic goods, proof that a nimble ship and a daring captain could outmatch any official war fleet. But Elizabeth was just warming up. In 1577, she quietly ordered Drake to attempt a circumnavigation of the globe. His mission wasn't scientific survey or colonial settlement, it was full-blown treasure hunting. For 3 years, 1577 to 1580, Drake and his crew charted uncharted waters, raided Spanish outposts from Patagonia to the Spice Islands, and carried home enough booty to choke a galley. When the Golden Hind sailed triumphantly into port, Elizabeth didn't throw a lavish state banquet, she simply ensured his men got pensions and land grants, leaving the Spaniards to stew in humiliation. Meanwhile, the Queen turned to Sir Walter Raleigh to spearhead England's first colonial experiments in North America. In the mid-1580s, Raleigh backed expeditions to Virginia, chasing rumours of medicinal herbs and untold riches. Though the lost colony at Roanoke famously vanished, those early ventures inspired merchants to fund further voyages, hoping for tobacco fortunes and timber trade. Elizabeth's cunning lay in saying, "Yes, explore at your own risk," while granting charters that protected investors and gave them exclusive trading rights. To back these ventures, Elizabeth overhauled ship design. She championed the so-called lightning ships, galleons built for speed and agility rather than bulk. Imagine slender hulls cutting through waves, broadside guns thundering, then nimbly darting away under sail. Shipwrights at Deptford and Woolwich experimented with hull shapes and rigging, while navigators at Greenwich honed their sextants and astrolabes. Together, they forged a fleet that could challenge Spain's Armada piecemeal rather than slug it out head-on. The results were spectacular. England didn't need vast colonies overnight to fill its coffers. Privateers brought in wealth by the ton, fueling more shipbuilding and more voyages. Merchants formed joint stock companies, pooling their savings to outfit ships bound for the New World and beyond. From the docks of London to the taverns of Bristol, people celebrated tales of Queen of the Pirates and her bold sea rovers. Yet Elizabeth never trumpeted her sponsorship. In public, she spoke of piety and peace. In private, she congratulated her captains with quiet approval. She understood that grand proclamations might provoke outright war, so she let her ships do the talking. Spain fumed. France bristled, but neither dared strike first, knowing that England's privateers could haunt their treasure fleets anywhere from the Atlantic to the Pacific. By the end of her reign, Elizabeth's maritime vision had transformed England from a distracted island into a budding naval power. The East India Company, chartered in 1590, traced its lineage to her privateer policies, and though she never set foot on those distant shores, her influence rode every wave, carried by captains, merchants, and adventurers who believed a single queen's dream could reshape the world. So next time you spy a map with England's flag in the corners of distant continents, Tip a hat to Elizabeth I. She saw beyond courtly whispers and royal marriages, betting instead on the glint of cannon fire, the promise of uncharted lands, and the daring of men who sailed under her secret favour. In doing so, she plotted the course for centuries of English and later British maritime supremacy, proving that sometimes the boldest adventures begin with a quiet nod and a parchment seal. Let's set aside the cannons and the caravels for a moment and wander into the glittering world of Elizabeth I's cultural court, because while she was plotting naval victories, she was also orchestrating a literary revolution that would echo for centuries. Imagine the palace as a grand salon, where the air thrummed not with marching drums, but with the scratch of quills and the murmur of recitations. Elizabeth, having settled the religious wars and quelled foreign threats, turned her royal attention inward, determined to feed her people's minds as fiercely as she had defended their shores. She summoned poets, playwrights, and scholars from every corner of England, promising patronage, prestige, and of course the Queen's own ear for their creations. First among her star pupils was William Shakespeare, a name that even today sends goosebumps up your arms. Under Elizabeth's aegis, he penned Romeo and Juliet, a tale of forbidden love so potent it still performed in every corner of the globe. Then came Hamlet, that meditation on madness and mortality that made soliloquies into an art form. You can almost hear Elizabeth, draped in crimson velvet, leaning forward as the ghost's lament echoed through the courtyard, her jewelled bodice catching the torchlight. But Shakespeare wasn't the only luminary. Edmund Spenser strutted onto the scene with The Fairy Queen, an epic poem brimming with knights, magic, and moral allegory. Picture Elizabeth flipping through thick vellum pages, tracing Spenser's rhymes with a manicured finger, mentally rewarding each stanza with a nod of approval, or perhaps a raised eyebrow if it failed to enchant. And when the plays and poems were written, Elizabeth wasn't content to sit behind heavy curtains like some aloof spectator. No, she frequently slipped onto the stage herself, anonymously of course, to deliver a chorus line or join the masque. The courtiers gasped. There, at the front of the dais, the Queen herself, sparkling with pearls and feigning a lowly role, her laughter ringing out above the actors. Talk about immersive theatre. If it sounds like all-night arts festivals, that's because, in a way, they were. Every week, Whitehall's Great Hall transformed into a swirl of dancers. Candles pooled their golden light on tiled floors, and lutes and viols wove melodies that pulled toes to tap and corseted waists to sway. Elizabeth, radiant in a gown studded with gems, sat enthroned on a dais, applause rising like a wave with every flourish of dance. When a lull occurred, she'd raise a fan, smile, and let the next minuet begin. Now, you might think that a queen so steeped in pageantry might neglect her studies, but not Elizabeth. Her tutors had drilled her in history, philosophy, and rhetoric from childhood. By her 20s, she spoke 7 languages: English, Latin, French, Greek, Spanish, Italian, and Welsh. That linguistic arsenal gave her an edge at court. A French ambassador would attempt a flowery compliment only to find Elizabeth replying in flawless French, peppered with classical allusions. The poor envoy would blush, thinking, I came to flatter her, but she's schooling me in eloquence. Her letters likewise dazzled. When she penned dispatches in Latin or crafted treaties in Greek, foreign dignitaries knew they weren't merely reading royal directives, they were marvelling at one of Europe's most brilliant minds. She could critique policy as deftly as she critiqued a sonnet, spotting a diplomatic misstep as quickly as a misplaced rhyme. By nurturing arts and learning so lavishly, Elizabeth forged an England famous not only for its martial might, but for its intellectual clout. Parisian salons spoke of the English miracle, where playwrights and poets outshone their continental peers. Venetian merchants marvelled at English libraries filled with classical texts. Even the Vatican, though wary of her religious policies, could not help but admire the sophistication of her court. So, here's the takeaway. While other monarchs prided themselves on conquests and crowns, Elizabeth I built her legacy on quills as much as on swords. She showed that a nation's strength blossoms when its culture and intellect flourish. And as the candlelight dimmed each night in Whitehall, the echoes of laughter, applause, and whispered verses lingered proof that under Elizabeth's reign, England's greatest treasure was not gold or territory, but the boundless creativity of its people. As Elizabeth I entered the final stretch of her reign, she was far from resting on her laurels. In fact, she doubled down on strengthening the very gears of government, the legal and administrative machinery that would keep England humming long after her own time. First order of business? A raft of statutes designed to steady local governance. These laws clarified the duties of justices of the peace, delineated the powers of sheriffs, and spelled out procedures for holding assizes. In plain English, that meant no more rogue magistrates doing whatever they liked. Now every county answered to a uniform set of rules. Rugged border regions and sleepy villages alike found themselves under the same peaceful umbrella of justice. Next up, Elizabeth turned her attention to the royal purse strings. She overhauled the tax system and tightened up the royal customs service, no small feat when smuggling and bribery were as commonplace as ale in a tavern. She ordered that customs officers keep twin ledgers, one for local records, one for Whitehall, so discrepancies would scream out like a dropped plate. Suddenly, coffers that had once leaked gold like a sieve now brimmed with revenue, all thanks to clearer tariffs on wool, wine, and luxury silks. But even the best legal frameworks can be derailed by corruption. So Elizabeth established the Crown's Commissioners for Public Inquiry, a formidable panel of lawyers and former soldiers tasked with investigating malfeasance. Rumours of embezzled land sales or overcharged tithes meant a royal commission at your door. These commissioners, armed with letters patent bearing the Queen's seal, could subpoena witnesses, seize records, and even remove crooked officials. The mere whisper that the commissioners might appear was often enough to straighten a crooked ledger. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Elizabeth kept Europe's power balance on a razor's edge. She supported the Dutch rebels in their struggle against Spanish rule supplies, money, and occasional covert raids, while simultaneously offering discreet sanctuary to English Catholics who recognized her as supreme governor. It was a delicate dance. One misstep and Spain would declare open war. But through careful diplomacy and a network of loyal ambassadors, she maintained a tense equilibrium, ensuring that neither France nor the Habsburg Empire could outmaneuver her. Of course, managing foreign intrigue invited its own dangers. Zealous Catholic extremists conspired to eliminate her more than once. But thanks to Sir Francis Walsingham and the Queen's legendary spy network, every whisper of assassination was uncovered long before poison could be sprinkled into a goblet. Walsingham's agents cloaked as merchants, clerics, even servants intercepted letters in coded ciphers, turned double agents among enemy emissaries, and delivered bone-chilling proofs of treason directly to Elizabeth's desk. When plots were unravelled, conspirators found themselves quietly removed or quietly executed, ensuring that the realm remained secure. At home, her aging bones felt the ache of gout and chronic pains, but Elizabeth refused to concede authority to her infirmities. Day after day, she presided over Privy Council meetings from dawn until the flickering candlelight of midnight. Advisors lined up with dispatches from every corner of the kingdom. Harvest failures in the north, rebellions in Scotland, shipbuilding delays in the south. She listened patiently, her voice soft but firm, questioning, guiding, and ultimately deciding. Even when her joints screamed, she sat astride her throne with regal composure, reminding all that the crown's burden fell squarely on her shoulders. Pain be damned. This steely resolve earned her more than admiration for her beauty or her flair for courtly pageantry. Elizabeth came to be remembered as a sovereign whose will was unbreakable, even by age. In portraits painted during her later years, she stands immortalized with high collar, rough angelic white, eyes watchful, lips set in serene determination. Poets and historians alike celebrated her as the archetype of steadfast governance. She had proven that a ruler's mettle is tested not only in glorious victories, but also in the quiet, unyielding exercise of duty overcoming personal suffering to serve the realm. By the time Elizabeth I drew her final breath, her kingdom stood on a foundation of law, lavish culture, and naval might tested, balanced, and ripe for the next chapter. But perhaps her greatest legacy was the example she set, that true power lies in the seamless fusion of gentle wisdom and unwavering authority. So as you drift off tonight, imagine her resolve echoing through time, a whisper that says, "No matter the storm, stand firm. Lead with heart and steel, for that is how kingdoms endure." When Elizabeth I drew her last breath on the 24th of March 1603, at the age of 69, she closed the curtains on a reign that had spanned nearly half a century, and left behind a legacy to rival any in European history. In that moment, the Tudor chapter ended not with chaos, but with a kingdom as solid as bedrock. Borders that had buckled under skirmishes and dynastic feuds now lay secure. The seesaw of religious turmoil, which had swung violently between Mary I's Catholic fervour and Edward VI's Protestant zeal, finally rested on a stable compromise. The machinery of government law courts, local magistracies, and royal customs ran smoothly, filling the royal coffers and sustaining the realm's prosperity. Science and the arts flourished in a cultural renaissance, and England's navy, once a modest flotilla, strode the seas like a colossus. Without a public will naming her heir, Elizabeth nevertheless ensured a peaceful succession. Her cousin James, King of Scots, whom she affectionately called her cousin, though he addressed her simply as aunt, became James I of England, without a single battle or rebellion. Can you imagine? A royal transition smoother than morning tea. The union of the crowns that followed set the stage for the Stuart dynasty, and for once, two kingdoms joined hands rather than brandishing swords. Historians would come to nickname Elizabeth the Virgin Queen, not merely for her lifelong pledge of singleness, but as a symbol of personal autonomy and unshakable authority. Portraits captured her in silks, stitched with pearls, hand resting on an ostrich feather fan, eyes gleaming with that signature mix of warmth and steely resolve. You've seen the Armada portrait, right? That dramatic painting where she points imperiously toward a storm, a neat visual metaphor for her dominance over both wind and war. Scholars credit Elizabeth with weaving England into a single, cohesive tapestry. She tamed wayward nobles in Yorkshire, negotiated trade treaties with the Low Countries, and sponsored voyages that mapped distant shores. All the while, she cultivated what would become the British Empire's roots: coffee from Mocha, spices from Ceylon, silks from the Orient. These were the distant echoes of her policies. And let's not forget the silver screen and the Broadway stage. Every time a film about her life flickers to life, or a novel dips into her intrigue, her shadow rises once more. Nearly 5 centuries have fluttered by, and yet Elizabeth's name still rings out proof that her impact extended far beyond statutes and gunpowder. She wasn't just a political trailblazer, she became a cultural icon, a muse for playwrights, poets, and painters. From the grandest oil canvases in stately halls to cheeky graphic novels in college dorms, she lives on as an embodiment of intelligence meeting charisma. So what does all this mean for us, lying here in the soft glow of our screens? It means that leadership can be more than force of arms. It can be the fine art of balance, the ability to hold one's nerve when storms gather, and to inspire loyalty through both deed and word. Elizabeth's story reminds us that a single person's vision, when yoked to courage, wit, and resolve, can ripple through history. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, picture her final portrait. A queen in scarlet robes, clutching her fan, her gaze set on a future she never lived to see, yet shaped so profoundly. Let that image fade gently like dusk over the Thames. And as you drift towards sleep, hear a soft whisper on the evening breeze. Rest well, for tomorrow brings new tales, and in dreams we meet again in the court of Elizabeth. Imagine Elizabeth I in her later years, sleeves rolled up well, as much as a royal sleeve can roll up, and leaning over parchment with quill in hand, determined to leave behind more than just grand speeches and glittering jewels. Her reign had already dazzled with naval triumphs and cultural fireworks, but she knew that a kingdom also needed sturdy legal foundations, like a house needing a rock-solid basement. So Elizabeth set about fortifying England's justice system and laws in ways that still echo down the centuries. First, she cast a fresh eye on the Star Chamber. Now, if you've seen Tudor dramas, you know this wasn't some polite dinner club. It was the High Court where mighty lords could be called to account. Under Elizabeth, it transformed into a no-nonsense tribunal dedicated to rooting out corruption among high-ranking officials. Bribes, embezzlement, abuse of office. Any noble who fancied himself above the law found himself summoned to that very chamber, his misdeeds laid bare under candlelight. It was like a medieval audit, but with far graver consequences than a slap on the wrist. Each year, the Queen herself would deliver the speech to Parliament, a tradition she insisted upon to affirm the rule of law. Forget dry formalities. Elizabeth approached that podium as though she were unveiling the season's hottest musical. She praised Parliament's role in passing taxes, debated the budget's merits, and reminded everyone, nobles and commoners alike, that no person, no matter how well connected, stood above the law. Her speeches were printed and circulated, so that even in far-flung villages, gentlemen might read her words by hearthlight and feel the pulse of governance. This practice created a lasting bond between the Crown and its lawmakers, laying the groundwork for the modern parliamentary system that Britain now prides itself on. Meanwhile, in matters of faith, a kettle that had boiled over into wars across Europe, Elizabeth baked a very different stew altogether. She brought forth two landmark acts, the Act of Uniformity and the Religious Settlement. The Act of Uniformity established a common worship service for the Church of England, an outward ritual reminiscent of Catholic pageantry, complete with vestments and formal prayers, yet grounded in Protestant theology. It was like serving up a familiar dish with a new recipe, comforting enough to prevent rebellion, but different enough to reflect the realm's Protestant soul. The religious settlement went further. It granted private tolerance for Catholic worship. Think of it as a peace treaty for parishioners, so long as they acknowledged Elizabeth as supreme governor. No more clandestine seizures or secret masses leading to arrests. Folks could pray in their own homes without fear of hanging. Sure, it wasn't perfect tolerance by modern standards, but it was a massive leap from the bloody persecutions on the continent. Elizabeth had struck a delicate balance, cool negotiations rather than hot swords, ensuring England avoided the horrific religious wars that ravaged France and the Holy Roman Empire. At home, these reforms created ripple effects. Farmers and merchants felt secure in their lands and contracts, trusting that local justices of the peace would uphold fair judgments rather than line their own pockets. Customs officers, armed with clearer guidelines from Whitehall, collected duties without the usual bribery, shaving corruption off trade like a hot knife through butter. And while Europe's princes danced around each other in armed alliances over faith, England's clergy and congregations learned, for better or worse, to coexist under a single national church. Yet the genius of Elizabeth's vision lay not only in writing laws but in knitting them into society's fabric. She backed the Inns of Court in London, the universities at Oxford and Cambridge, and even local grammar schools, ensuring that students from all walks of life could learn the principles of law and rhetoric. Future judges and lawyers cut their teeth memorizing statutes she passed, quoting her speeches as precedents in court. By the time the 17th century rolled around, England had the tools to debate taxes, draft petitions, and even challenge royal authority in ways that would eventually shape constitutional monarchy. So there you have it. Elizabeth I didn't merely bedeck herself in pearls and lead triumphant fleets. She also wrote the playbook for a just and stable state. She proved that true sovereignty combines the sword with the parchment, the cannon with the courtroom. And as you drift off to sleep, let the quiet echo of quills scratching across vellum remind you that while empires rise and fall on battlefields, the deepest legacies are inscribed in law, culture, and the steady hum of orderly government. All right, settle in, because Elizabeth I wasn't just about fireworks and fancy gowns. She was the original long-term planner, mapping out England's future like a grand chess master. From day one on the throne, she understood that short-term wins are sweet, but long-term alliances are the real treasure. First, picture Elizabeth dispatching envoys across Europe, no Instagram snaps, mind you, but real live ambassadors in full regalia. She sent diplomats to France, Spain, the United Provinces, and Scotland, each with a remit. Observe troop counts, gauge treasury health, and sniff out court intrigues. These envoys returned with leather pouches stuffed with clasped letters and coded reports, which Elizabeth pored over in her cabinet by candlelight. With this intelligence, she could adjust foreign policy on the fly, supporting one faction against another, nudging negotiations here, tightening trade embargoes there. Back at home, she knew talent was power. Enter Francis Bacon, her new Lord Chancellor. Bacon wasn't just a lawyer, he was a philosopher, pushing empirical science and clear reasoning. Under Elizabeth's wing, he churned out essays that sowed seeds for the scientific revolution centuries later. Then there was William Cecil, Lord Salisbury, her Secretary of State, her right hand in everything from land reform to naval strategy. Salisbury and Bacon formed a dynamic duo of brainpower, each keeping an eye on the other so no single advisor could run unchecked. It was an early version of checks and balances, Tudor style. But brains alone don't pay the bills. Elizabeth also championed English industry. She backed craftsmen's guilds, especially wool weavers in East Anglia, and encouraged apothecaries to distill exotic spices. Why spices? Because everyone craved pepper and cinnamon, and England needed to break Spain's monopoly. So she granted charters to the fledgling East India Company spelled out in royal letters patent, giving English merchants exclusive trading rights in the East Indies. Sure, those voyages were hit or miss at first, but the groundwork was laid for a trade network that would one day bring tea and textiles back to London's docks. Meanwhile, Elizabeth fortified England's naval future with the creation of naval academies. Imagine something like a maritime boot camp, but with chalkboards and sextants instead of cannonballs. Young men learned navigation by the stars, practiced seamanship in smaller vessels, and studied gunnery drills on scaled models before ever stepping aboard a full-sized galleon. These academies churned out skilled officers and sailors who would man England's fast lightning ships, slim, swift galleons capable of outmaneuvering heavier Spanish warships. The combined effect of these policies was nothing short of transformation. In her reign's early decades, England was a middling kingdom sandwiched between continental powers. By her final years, thanks to savvy diplomacy, intellectual investment, commercial charters, and naval training, England had risen to maritime preeminence. Merchant ships flew the English flag to Africa, India, and the New World, while warships patrolled the Channel and beyond. It wasn't magic. It was meticulous strategy. Elizabeth never chased every opportunity she picked and chose, ensuring each alliance or venture served long-term goals. The virtual marriage diplomacy we talked about earlier ensured Europe courted her without pressing too hard. Bacon's logical reforms and Salisbury's administrative oversight kept policy on track. Trade charters laid commercial tracks across the globe, while naval academies trained the conductors. Because of her, England morphed from just another European player into the world's leading sea power, setting the stage for the global British Empire of the 17th and 18th centuries. Generals on horseback and admirals at sea both owed their success to her early decisions in quiet council rooms, where she sketched maps, signed charters, and whispered directives that would echo for centuries. So, my friends, next time you think about planning for tomorrow, remember Elizabeth I. She looked beyond immediate feasts and fetes, charting courses for decades to come. She taught us that true leadership isn't just about winning battles, but about building alliances, investing in people, and training for the challenges ahead. And in doing so, she wrote one of history's greatest playbooks on how a kingdom can rise from modest roots to shape the world. All right, let's dive into the shadowy side of Elizabeth I's reign, her undercover ops and state security that rival any modern spy thriller. Picture this: a kingdom rife with religious zealots, secret assassination plots, and foreign powers whispering in every ear. Elizabeth knew that cannon fire and royal decrees weren't enough to keep her safe. She needed eyes and ears everywhere. Enter Sir Francis Walsingham, her indomitable principal secretary and de facto spymaster general. Think of him as the head of Elizabeth's Miss 16th minus the tuxedos and the martini. Walsingham recruited an elite network of agents, code breakers and double agents, all sworn to secrecy under penalty of torture or worse. They scoured London's alleys, infiltrated Catholic households, and intercepted letters in ciphers so fiendish only the sharpest minds could crack them. Let's rewind to that tense moment after the failed assassination attempt on King Philip II of Spain. Extremist English Catholics had shown they were willing to kill for their cause. Elizabeth couldn't shrug and hope for the best. She needed a comprehensive counterplot. So Walsingham's volunteers, men and women disguised as merchants, priests, or even gypsies, slipped into Catholic exile circles on the continent. They listened at taverns in Paris, peered into confessional booths, and carried encoded dispatches back to Whitehall. Their crowning coup came with the Babington Plot of 1586. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic conspirator, hatched a scheme to assassinate Elizabeth and install Mary, Queen of Scots, on the English throne. Here's where the Walsingham machine kicked into overdrive. Their codebreakers, armed with stolen cipher keys, read every encrypted line Babington sent to Mary. Each letter, meticulously annotated, revealed Mary's complicity. Walsingham presented Elizabeth with the hard evidence, ink-stained parchments dripping with treason. In 1587, Mary of Scots faced trial and execution, her fate sealed by those intercepted letters. It was a masterstroke. Not only did Elizabeth eliminate a direct threat, But she also sent a clear message to every court in Europe: cross England at your peril. No secret council, no papal bull, no royal envoy could hide from Walsingham's web. But it wasn't just about catching would-be regicides. The network kept tabs on foreign ambassadors, uncovering which monarchs planned to renege on alliances or tighten blockades against English ships. When rumours of a Spanish invasion brewed, Walsingham's scouts in Madrid fed timely intelligence back to the Admiralty in London. Thanks to this shadow army, Elizabeth's diplomats negotiated from a position of strength, always a step ahead. Domestically, Walsingham's agents disrupted plots before they flowered. Priests harbouring seminary-trained radicals found their secret meetings raided. Pamphlets preaching rebellion vanished from printers' presses overnight. Threats of uprisings, whether by angry northern earls or disaffected gentry, were neutralised by swift arrests and summary trials. Citizens slept safer, though many never knew who protected them in the dead of night. Elizabeth herself rarely spoke of these clandestine victories. She preferred her image as the gracious queen, dispensing charity and hosting courtly masques. But behind the scenes, she funded Walsingham's service from a slush fund in the royal coffers, approving covert expenditures with a mere signature. No public fanfare, just quiet nods and sealed orders that kept her realm secure. Why call her reign the dawn of state intelligence? Because England under Elizabeth was among the first to institutionalise espionage linking foreign affairs, domestic policing, and code-breaking under a single organ of state. Other nations would follow suit, but Walsingham's blueprint set the gold standard: recruit loyal agents, intercept and decode communications, infiltrate enemy networks, and act decisively on solid evidence. So, as you curl up for the night, imagine the hush of Whitehall corridors, the rustle of trailing cloaks, and the clicking of quills as codebreakers decrypted plots by candlelight. Know that Elizabeth's throne was not defended solely by musketeers and royal decrees, but by a quiet legion of unseen heroes. They ensured her safety, and the safety of England one intercepted letter at a time. And if you ever need inspiration in your own life, remember, sometimes the most powerful victories happen not on the battlefield, but in the silent war of wit and vigilance. Sleep well, dear viewer, and stay one step ahead, just like the Queen's own Secret Service. Imagine Elizabeth I slipping away from the weighty matters of state to indulge in pursuits that made her seem almost relatable. Though she never married, she devoted countless hours to the chase, quite literally. Picture her in a hunting lodge on the edge of Richmond Park, drawing a longbow of fine yew, eyes narrowing as the stag bounds into view. She releases the arrow with practiced ease, showing the courtiers that a queen's aim could be as true as her policies. When she wasn't atop a saddle, galloping through dew-drenched meadows before dawn, she was in the palace's music chamber, presiding over intimate concerts. The gentle strains of harp and virginals floated through Whitehall's corridors, carrying news that the Queen herself would perform. Imagine guests leaning forward, breath held, as her fingers danced across ivory keys, coaxing melodies that soothed even the sternest noble's heart. In those moments, Elizabeth shed her royal armour and simply became a musician among friends, an image both surprising and enchanting. But don't think this was casual happenstance. Elizabeth curated these gatherings with the same precision she applied to her councils. She commissioned striking portraits as carefully as she selected her musicians. Many a foreign ambassador returned home, clutching a painting of the Queen none more iconic than the Armada portrait. In that masterpiece, Elizabeth stands before a raging sea, one hand resting on a globe, the other pointing toward the smoking wrecks of Spanish galleons. It was more than art. It was propaganda, a silent proclamation of her triumph over Philip II. Her flair extended to fashion too. Elizabeth personally sketched designs for her gowns, mixing pearls, ostrich feathers and gossamer lace in patterns that seemed to defy gravity. Each ensemble was a statement, bold yet refined, commanding yet approachable. Even as age crept in bringing its aches of gout and stiffening joints, she maintained an almost supernatural radiance. Her diet was famously strict: lean meats, fresh fruits, and herbs prescribed by royal apothecaries. Her skincare? Potions distilled from rosewater, lavender, and chamomile, applied in gentle circles each morning. In a court where pale skin was the mark of nobility, Elizabeth's face remained smooth, her cheeks subtly flushed, her gaze bright. To the people of England, she was more than a monarch. She was mother of the nation. They whispered of petitions granted, a widow's small pension when her husband fell in battle, a hearty meal delivered to a sick pauper, a coin placed in the hand of an out-of-work minstrel before he left the palace gates. These acts of kindness were never ostentatious. They were quietly whispered about in market squares and taverns, growing into legends of a queen who saw the faces behind the headlines. Even in her private moments, Elizabeth's generosity shone. On festive days, she would mingle with commoners disguised in simple cloak and hood, distributing loaves of bread and jugs of ale. The recipients thought themselves blessed by the hand of Mother Elizabeth, unaware of the velvet slippers beneath her plain shoes. That humility, not just her regal splendor, endured in folk songs and ballads, verses praising her wisdom, acknowledging her strength, and celebrating the compassion that endeared her to all classes. All these personal passions, hunting, riding, music, fashion, and charity, blended into a portrait of a queen who was at once magnificent and approachable. Courtiers admired her strategic mind. Common folk adored her maternal care. Her private life was a tapestry of contrasts. Fierce archer and gentle patron, strict ruler and compassionate benefactor. And as word of her deeds spread, loyalty grew deeper than any feudal oath. It became rooted in gratitude and genuine affection. So when you picture Elizabeth I in your mind's eye, don't see a distant figure perched behind a velvet curtain. Instead, imagine her stepping into the morning mist on horseback, her bowstring singing as she aims true. Then imagine her returning to Whitehall to play the virginals, her laughter echoing among the candlesticks. And finally, picture her pausing in her private gallery to oversee a painting or sign a small grant for a needy family. That was Elizabeth, a queen whose blend of splendor and humanity forged a bond with her people that outlasted her reign, echoing through history like a soft but persistent melody. And so, on the 24th of March, 1603, at the age of 69, Elizabeth I quietly passed from this world, drawing the curtain on the Tudor dynasty with a sigh of respect echoing throughout England. Imagine the hush that fell over Whitehall, the flicker of torches dimming as courtiers paused in sorrow, then bowed their heads in gratitude for a reign that had reshaped a nation. Elizabeth left no formal will naming her successor, yet her final act of statecraft was nothing short of brilliant. She had already, in whispered counsel, assured that her cousin James, King of Scotland, her own first cousin twice removed, whom she affectionately called my cousin, would inherit the English crown. With that single choice, she forged the union of the crowns, binding England and Scotland under one monarch without a drop of bloodshed. When James I ascended the throne, there were no rebel armies, no palace coups, just a seamless handover, a peaceful bridge from Tudor to Stuart that endured until the mid-17th century. What remains of Elizabeth's legacy? Picture it etched into the very fabric of English life. In law rooms, judges still invoke principles she championed. In Parliament, her annual speech to Parliament echoes through centuries of custom. Those traditions, born in flickering candlelit halls, paved the way for the modern parliamentary system we know today. Culturally, her imprint is no less profound. Think of the strains of Zadok the Priest, Handel's coronation anthem that can trace its roots to the doctrine of England, the anthemic spirit of a nation united under a single sovereign. Shakespeare's masterpieces, Hamlet, Othello, Romeo, and Juliet, first found their footing under Elizabeth's patronage, blossoming into global touchstones of drama. Spenser's The Fairy Queen still gleams like mythic gold in literary annals. Those works, born in her court, now fill every corner of the globe with their timeless themes of love, ambition, and fate. Yet, Elizabeth's reach extended beyond culture into the very marrow of statecraft. Her cunning diplomacy balanced the great powers of Europe. Her intelligence network under Francis Walsingham set the precedent for state espionage. Her support for privateers and the new navy launched England on its path to maritime supremacy. No wonder people called England the Lion of the Isles, a fierce but nimble sea power that could hold its own against any rival. And then there's the image. Elizabeth in her ceremonial robes, pearls at her throat, a fan of ostrich feathers in one hand and the ivory sceptre in the other, her eyes bright with unquenchable resolve. That portrait, the Armada portrait, has been reproduced countless times, in oil on canvas, in etched lines on paper, and now in digital pixels on screens worldwide. Poets penned odes to Her Majesty. Playwrights dramatized her court. Filmmakers cast her again and again in the flickering light of silver screens. Each new generation rediscovers her story and marvels at the woman who ruled with both steel and silk. Nearly 5 centuries have passed, and yet when we think of leadership, we still look to Elizabeth I as a lodestar. She showed that a leader could be wise and witty, formidable and fair, transforming a patchwork of squabbling nobles and regional disparities into a unified, thriving realm. She was a queen who governed by mind as much as by might, whose personal strength became the bedrock of national strength. So, as the evening closes in around you and your eyelids grow heavy, picture her one last time. Standing tall on the palace steps, the setting sun glinting off her crown, her gaze sweeping across a land she had shaped with unerring purpose. Remember her courage when storms raged, her patience when plots brewed, her vision that reached far beyond her lifetime. And know that the story of Elizabeth I remains alive in every law passed, every play performed, and every ship that sails under the flag she helped raise. Good night, dear viewer. May her legacy inspire your dreams, and may you rise tomorrow with the same unshakable resolve. Now, as your eyelids grow heavier and the evening hush wraps itself around you like a velvet cloak, let the tale of Elizabeth I drift gently into the corners of your mind, softening at the edges like a watercolor painting touched by the morning mist. Imagine her final portrait dissolving into the dusk, the regal crown and scepter paling until all that remains is the serene outline of a woman who dared to shape her world with wisdom and courage. In this quiet moment, remember that her story was never just about crowns or conquests, but about the power of steady resolve, the art of balance, and the grace of tempered strength. Elizabeth taught us that true leadership flows from self-mastery and empathy, from listening as attentively to a humble subject's plea as to the counsel of princes, and from forging peace where others sowed discord. Feel your breath slow, matching the gentle rhythm of history unfolding in whispers. Allow the virtues of her reign, judicious mercy, unshakable purpose, and the belief that a single person's vision can ripple across centuries to settle in your heart like seeds that will bloom with kindness and courage in your own life. As the last candle flickers low, let the image of her soft but steady gaze fade into the darkness, leaving behind only a warm ember of inspiration glowing in your chest. Know that every time you choose patience over haste, compassion over indifference, or principle over comfort, you carry forward the legacy of that remarkable queen. And now, in this peaceful hush, let me whisper one final wish. May your dreams be as bold as her voyages, as creative as her patronage, and as anchored in hope as her steadfast rule. Sleep well, dear friend, and if you'd like to join us for more stories that lull the mind and stir the soul, simply subscribe to our channel there. New adventures await, soft and splendid, ready to guide you gently into tomorrow. Good night.